The first problem is geography. Venezuela is not Panama. It is not Grenada. It is a large, heavily forested, mountainous, and urbanized country. Much of its territory resembles the kind of terrain that chewed up U.S. forces in Vietnam. Denser vegetation, narrow coastal zones, broken interior geography, and vast rural areas make conventional operations difficult and counterinsurgency operations even harder. You cannot conduct a rapid decapitation strike and expect the state to fall neatly into your hands. The terrain itself undermines the idea of a limited surgical mission. The second problem is preparation. Unlike Iraq in 2003 or Libya in 2011, Venezuela has had decades to anticipate an invasion. Its leadership saw the writing on the wall long ago. They studied the failures of Serbia, Saddam Hussein, and Muammar Gaddafi. They watched the U.S. demolish unprepared states with precision air power, but they also saw the limits of American force. They saw the United States fail in places where the adversary had the will, the terrain, and the backing to resist, and they understood that survival depended on building a defense capable not of winning a war outright, but of making an invasion politically impossible. This is where Russia fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Modern Russian air defense systems are not symbolic, they are lethal. They complicate every aspect of U.S. force projection, from fighter jets to cruise missiles to naval aviation. When you lack the ability to establish air superiority quickly, everything becomes costlier. Casualties increase, political risk increases, mission timelines expand. What was envisioned as a rapid intervention becomes a protracted operation against a capable defender. Add to this Iranian anti-ship missiles and indigenous asymmetric capabilities, and the calculus shifts even further against Washington. The third problem is recent history. The United States has a poor track record against well-armed, determined adversaries. In Afghanistan, after 20 years of fighting, trillions of dollars spent, and tens of thousands of lives lost, the Taliban returned to power within days of U.S. withdrawal. In Iraq, the shock and awe campaign created a power vacuum that devolved into chaos, insurgency, and eventually the rise of ISIS. In Yemen, the United States and its allies have been unable to suppress Ansarullah, a far weaker adversary than the Venezuelan military. If Washington struggles to prevail in these theaters, imagining it can subdue a fortified state backed by Russia and Iran is not a strategy. It is wishful thinking. The fourth problem is political risk. A failed invasion would be catastrophic for U.S. prestige. Even a costly victory could be strategically disastrous. Venezuela has the ability to inflict damage that would be humiliating on the global stage. Anti-ship missiles could strike U.S. vessels. Russian-trained air defense crews could down U.S. aircraft. Venezuelan forces fighting on home terrain could inflict casualties that would shock the American public. No U.S. President Trump included wants to preside over the first major naval or air humiliation inflicted by a Latin American state. The political consequences would be severe, and voters have shown repeatedly that they have little patience for long, grinding, unpredictable wars. The final problem is the regional environment. For decades, Washington believed it could recruit proxies, Colombia, Brazil, or other regional actors to help pressure Caracas, but those assumptions no longer hold. Latin America is no longer a compliant extension of U.S. policy. Public opinion across the continent is deeply hostile to foreign intervention. Brazil and Argentina face internal crises of their own, and none of these states can absorb the consequences of a failed war against a Russian-armed neighbor. The idea of assembling a South American equivalent of Syrian rebels, a proxy force trained to overthrow Caracas, misreads both the region and the moment. The more one examines the invasion scenario, the more the contradictions pile up. Venezuela is too large, too prepared, too well armed, and too well integrated into a network of adversarial powers to be treated as a soft target. The United States can destabilize, sanction, and pressure, but it cannot impose regime change at an acceptable cost. The fortress is not a metaphor. It's a recognition that the era of cheap invasions is over. When you add all of this together, the geography, the preparation, the Russian and Iranian support, the U.S. track record, the regional politics, and the catastrophic risks, one conclusion emerges with clarity. A full-scale U.S. invasion collapses under the weight of its own strategic contradictions. The United States has encountered the limits of force, not because its military is weak, but because it is confronting a world that has adapted, hardened, and prepared for the very tactics Washington once took for granted. When Americans talk about Venezuela, the debate quickly collapses into an argument about socialism versus capitalism. It is a framing that sounds ideological, moral, and familiar, but from a realist perspective, it is nothing more than a distraction, a political smokescreen that conceals the actual drivers of U.S. foreign policy. The world is not divided between socialist and capitalist states. It is divided between states that control their own resources and states that allow external actors to control them. Washington's fixation on Venezuela is not about ideology. It is about compliance, access, and the control of strategic assets in a global system increasingly defined by scarcity and financial fragility. The ideological framing persists because it has deep roots in American political culture. Label a government socialist, and half the U.S. political system will reflexively support its removal. They will ignore the historical record, the social conditions, and even the basic data. They will assume that a socialist state is doomed to collapse and that replacing it with a neoliberal U.S.-aligned government will bring prosperity. But this narrative, repeated endlessly, has almost no relationship to Venezuela's reality. Long before Chavez, under governments that were staunch allies of Washington and fully embraced neoliberal policies, poverty rates were extraordinarily high, often worse than they are today. Basic services were dysfunctional. Inequality was extreme. And the profits from Venezuela's vast oil wealth flowed to a narrow elite and foreign corporations